Magavana Melanin. So, welcome back to part two of light language. And I wanted to take my time with this because I found this really great book called Splintered Light and Logos and Language in Tolkien's World. So, one of the things that is kind of a well known theme about Tolkien for those that study Tolkien is the idea that he used the image of light and he used language in order to create this fantasy world that people have come to love so much. So, the idea about light language and the idea that it helps to elevate consciousness, it helps to bring more authentic truth to the surface, is kind of actually the theme of the Elvish language, in which why Tolkien even wanted to create the Elvish language in the first place. So it's interesting to know that he's not just an author, but he was a linguist. He was into philology, which was the study of language, and he knew lots of different languages. He actually was familiar with Latin, Greek, Italian, Spanish, ancient Germanic, Gothic, Old Norse, and Old English. And he also discovered Finnish. So the really neat thing about the Elvish language, and I noticed that with my own light language, is it sometimes sounds a little Spanish, sometimes it sounds a little Italian. There's a lot of that rolled R's, there's a lot of those kind of Spanish sounds and the Italian sounds to Elvish, and that's what really gives it that beautiful kind of rolling through the tongue type of sound. And the way that it's delivered, it kind of has that really nice flow to it that Italian and Spanish do. And so it is neat to see that, because German, I actually studied German in high school. It has a little bit more of that harsher kind of sound to it, you know, Ich habe eine blaue Augen. So it has a little bit more of like a harder sound to it. And the Spanish and the Italian seem to soften it up a bit. But it does have that nice mix of both that harsh sounds and also the softer sounds. So we can start to understand how Tolkien started to discover the Elvish language through the way of mixing all of his languages that he really loved and enjoyed to study together into one. And he says something very interesting about language here that I wanted to share before I go into this book. So I found this, which was really neat. It says here, in an essay entitled English and Welsh, he wrote about the first time he encountered the language. So this is the first time that he encountered Quenya in his mind. A flash of strange spelling and a hint of a language old and yet alive. It pierced my linguistic heart. So he actually had almost like an experience of seeing the written symbols and the letters within his mind, and then hearing the sound within his mind, and it's just something that came from his heart, which is what light language does. So when you go into this book about the idea of light and the logos, which is kind of the old way of talking about creation and God, those themes are very prominent within Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And here is an amazing essay here that I wanted to read by Tolkien. It's a letter to his son, Christopher Tolkien. I perceived or thought of the light of God, and in it suspended one small mote, or millions of motes, to only one of which was my small mind directed, glittering white because of the individual ray from the light, which both held and lit it. Not that there were individual rays issuing from the light, but the mere existence of the mote and its position in relation to the light was in itself a line, and the line was light, and the ray was the guardian angel of the mote, not a thing interposed between God and the creature, but God's very attention itself, personalized. Okay, so there we start to see that light he absolutely had in mind, that was the major theme behind creating his language, was in order to show the light of God, to show the way that he saw the creator of the entire universe, and to bring forth a living language that would show this. Tolkien's response to words, to their shape and sound and meaning, was instinctive, intuitive, as well as intellectual, so that he approached words more as a musician than as a grammarian. So he started to form the words of the Elvish language within his mind, almost like a musician would put together notes for a song, for a grand symphony. So he understood the power of words. He understood that words were something that could create a reality that he was trying to create for others. And he started to build his world around that, in the fantasy world that we have come to love. And because he focused more primarily on the Elvish language, he did have a little bit of it's called the unfinished language of the orcs. So he didn't really give a full language to the orcs. He did put some words in, and he did start to dabble in that way, but he really focused and it's called a full language with the Elvish language. And there were several different types of the Elvish language, Sindarin and Quenya, and also a little bit of the Tolarian. But Tolarian is considered only half of the language, or not a complete language, because it's not a full one like the other Elvish languages. It says here, Tolkien is chiefly concerned with the nature of fantasy and the power of language to create a fantasy world. It's the same attitude towards words is at the heart of the concept which lies behind the Silmarillion. And so we start to see that it's not the idea that came first for his fantasy world. It's actually the words. The Elvish language actually came first to Tolkien, and then he started to create a fantasy world around the Elvish language. Now here is an actual essay, another one from Tolkien. He wrote several essays, because he wrote several articles. I mean, he was a philologist, and so he had several different essays on the nature of language and how much it actually meant to him and what he was really trying to accomplish. So this is a really insightful one right here, all about how he developed his light language. The human mind, endowed with powers of generalization and an abstraction, sees not only green grass, discriminating it from other things, and finding it fair to look upon, but sees that it is green as well as being grass. But how powerful, how stimulating to the very faculty that produced it was the invention of the objective. No spell or incantator in fairy is more potent, and that is not surprising. Such incantations might be said to be only another view of adjectives, a part of speech in a mythological grammar. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived a magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and the still rock into a swift water. If it could do the one, it could do the other. When we take green from grass, blue from heaven, and red from blood, we have already an enchanter's power. Upon one plane, with the desire to wield that power in the world external to our mind awakes. In such fantasy, as it is called, new form is made, and fairy begins. Man becomes a sub-creator. So Tolkien, this is why I consider Tolkien a mystic. You really have to go deeper into his life and understand the way that he saw religion. Yes, he was a devout Catholic, and even though some Catholics would not see that in that kind of way, he saw himself, or he saw humans, as sub-creators to God, to the all. So he knew in his mind that in all the evil and the darkness in the world, he went through World War II, he saw the evils of Hitler, he saw the evils of war and murder and mayhem. He was going to create a world that could come to life through words. He was an enchanter. He knew his power. And so light language, in a sense, is enchanting others. It is bringing forth a reality into existence no matter if you just think it's just sounds or not. It is moving energy and moving sound waves around, creating the reality that you wish to see. So Tolkien very much knew this about his Elvish language, and that's why it has a sort of seductive quality to it, and many people are drawn to learn it. Here is another idea here. This is very interesting. The basis of his work, so now this is coming from the author Verlyn Flieger. The basis of his work is the language. It permeates the story, builds the world, colors events, shapes characters, and supports and embodies a theme. To fully explore this, however, we must go back before language and begin with the time in Tolkien's world when the Valar are making concrete the patterns of the music. And here language and speech must be qualified. Eru speaks to the Ainur, and Tolkien frequently shows the Ainur in speech with one another, but it seems clear that this is meant to be taken as pre-verbal, as some kind of supersensible communication among spiritual beings. So here we start to see that Tolkien's usage of language is an expression of how he saw the Word of God, the Word that brought everything into existence according to Genesis, in that very mystical verse, the idea of, first there was the Word, and then there was let there be light. So the idea that words are a way of communicating what is the reality that we wish to see. So there's a lot of power behind words, and Tolkien knew this. And Tolkien developed his light language based on this idea of mixing all the languages together that he loved and creating a new sound that was coming from his soul, that was full of light and full of love for his creator, and felt part of this creation as a sub-creator, he would call himself often, and wrote about that idea often, that we are sub-creators, we are creating with God. And then he was able to create his beautiful Elvish language that we are able to learn today. Now, it's considered a dead language by some because it hasn't been added to, and it's not something that evolves, because language kind of evolves over time. But there are many who are trying to get it to actually become a live language once again, and to be able to add to it and have people actually speak it to each other as well. So I wanted to end with Elrond's blessing, because this was a really beautiful blessing, and it means a star shines on the hour of our meeting. Ilen sila luminen omen televo. And there you can see that the mix of Spanish, Italian, German, a little bit of the Finnish, all together create this wonderful sound that just kind of flows from the mouth. And as I said it, did you see the stars sparkling? Did you see the stars above us that indicate the coincidental or synchronicity of our meeting today? That's what Tolkien wanted to do, was to bring a reality of fairy, as he calls the land of fantasy, into reality for people, a place for them to bring their mind to when the world is seemingly darker by other people's unconscious deeds towards each other. He knew that by using the Elvish language and bringing it to life for others, that would bring a higher consciousness into this world and into this reality. Anybody who studies Elvish language, anybody who speaks it, even just a little bit, feels something stir inside. And maybe now you can focus on that more as you learn Elvish, as you read more books on the Elvish language. As you watch some of my videos, you'll understand what I am trying to do that Tolkien started, is bring fairy into life for people, to have them realize that this is your reality, and whatever you are as a sub-creator, you bring forth into this creation with others. So if you want to bring harmony, you want to bring peace, you want to bring light, then make sure you speak words of love and light and peace and harmony. And that's what the Elvish language can do. Now, I wrote a blog that was my truth coming out, saying that, the Elvish language doesn't really have swears. There's no slangs. There's no harsh words. There's no swears like we would use today. But elves do have sharp tongues, and so the way that they can speak to one another or to others, it can be used in a way to put people in their place. So if you go online, you'll actually find that there's a lot of different ways that you can not swear, but you can insult others in Elvish, like, oh, your mother is an orc. You can actually say that in Elvish language. But Tolkien really focused on the greetings, and in his language, he focused on, there's several different ways that you can greet someone as an elf. He focused on the way of communicating a spiritual sense of nature and a spiritual sense of reality of what's happening between the characters and where their destinies are bringing them towards. And so that's kind of where his language focused on. It wasn't so much in the slangs or in the insults or the mockery or, sometimes what language is used today. It was focused on more about bringing light to surface within. And that's what the elves really represent, is bringing forth that light into Middle Earth, reminding mankind what they come from. And as elves were the first children of Eru Ilúvatar, coming from the music of the Ainurs, coming from the Valors, they also were related to all the other creatures on Middle Earth. So when Aragorn learned Elvish, because he basically grew up in Rivendell, he also was infusing that Elvish light within him, which would bring Arwen into even falling in love with him. He was not like a normal man in the sense that he forgot where his divine soul was from, which is really what happened within mankind, within Middle Earth by the Third Age. Man forgot their power within. They forgot their innate power. They forgot their divinity. They forgot the themes of the Ainurs and the Valors, because Numenor, which were the elves and the man mixed together, causing the half-elven types like Arwen and Elrond, that was gone. And so all you had were the villages and the kingdoms, and they would war against each other. And the elves symbolized a time of harmony, of bringing back the original nature within, coming from the divine light and love of Eru. So in using Elvish light language, that was a symbol for Middle Earth of remembering their divine nature coming from the light and the logos that created Middle Earth in the very beginning. And that was what Tolkien was trying to do. So Elvish language is indeed a light language. At the very core of it, it was in order to bring more light into the world when Tolkien saw so much darkness during World War II. So keep on studying Elvish language. If you are enjoying speaking it, know that this is what it was always supposed to do, was to bring a little light into your heart, to bring a little fairy into your mind. Hand and lay for listening, and I'll see you on the next video.